It's time for dinner.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's delightful to be here again, and I welcome you to the fourth of our series of presentations on the history of South Brunswick. And I don't know if any of you were here for the last one, but I know when I went home, my head felt like I had been at a museum all day because it was so crammed with new information. And I think we'll find the same thing out today. My name is Ellen Gambatese, and rather than say what I've said 3 times before, I'll tell you this. About 30 years ago, believe it or not, several of my friends and I and my husband were discussing what we would like to be if we were an inanimate object. And I knew right away what I would like to be, because it would be a bridge. I take great pleasure in bringing opportunities together that creates a higher good. And an opportunity came my way when my husband kept coming home from the Historic Preservation Ordinance Task Force Advisory Panel, Group, Committee, and telling me what wonderful things he had seen about various areas of our township. I'm an educator, and I said, we have to get this information out to the broader community. And I tried to find a way to do that. Well, lo and behold, I was appointed to the library board. Aha, I said, let's do it. And I asked the library board if I could coordinate a program on the history of South Brunswick, and they were only too happy to accommodate. In fact, the Friends of the Library, whose chairman is Mrs. Susan Edelman, is sitting in the back of the room, volunteered to provide the tea and cookies for us. And Daphne Powell, a co-board member, has been faithful to the program and by being here to take care of that. Now, I want to thank them, and I want to thank all of the people who are part of this program, especially Tasso, our cameraman, and Joe, our sound man, and the presenters. Each part of South Brunswick is unique. I've only lived in town almost 9 years, but I've come to greatly appreciate what we are and how we got here. Today, we're going to find out how Monmouth Junction came into being, because it almost didn't. It was only because the railroads came together there that put it on the map as Monmouth Junction. It might be known as Longbridge had it not been for the railroads. So we're going to find out about that through the memory and the knowledge of Mrs. Ruth Spataro, who has lived in Monmouth Junction all of her life, and Mr. Dennis Farrelly, who is part of that Historic Preservation Ordinance Advisory Task Force. When he's not doing that, he works for Bristol Myers Squibb as a molecular biologist. He also lives in that very beautiful home on Ridge Road in Monmouth Junction that has that circular veranda with the little cupola on it. It's, you can't miss it. And what I'm going to ask you to do today when you go home, no, I'll save it. I think you'll appreciate it for later. Right now, let's begin with Our team, we're going to have a tandem approach today. That's something we haven't done yet. Dennis and Ruth will be working together to give us our presentation. Here they are.
Ellen, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm really pleased to see the audience, especially on a beautiful Sunday as it is. But we would like to present a bit of a story about Monmouth Junction. Our greetings from Monmouth Junction. I would really like to say that we're not going to be able to cover everything, and I apologize in advance if we don't have your favorite house or if we don't have your favorite story. We've tried to put together as much as we could to give you a sense of where Monmouth Junction came from, where it's going to. So first I would like to say this is a postcard I believe that Kiki Peerdenock picked up in Cape May, and it's I guess around the turn of the century it was rather common to have postcards from the various communities. And Ruth is going to start the presentation off by telling you something about where we're sitting right now.
Well, as the story starts, there was not any Monmouth Junction at the time this map was printed. My grandfather, William Rowland, was the fourth generation to live in the house that was built on the site where we are gathered today. Early maps identify C. Rowland. His name on Kingston Lane, his name Jonathan Cornelius Rowland. As the years passed, Cole came to live with my grandfather. He had built a house in the center of town then. It started to develop years later. But there wasn't any room in the house he built, so he had to build a room on for Cole. And then Cole left the homestead on this property, and soon after that it was destroyed by fire. Another house was built at this location, and at the time it was a beautiful hill here. But when the library came, the hill was leveled, and today we have the library on this spot. Cole died in 1911, and shortly after that I arrived. Now, I never slept where George Washington slept, but I always did sleep in the room where my great-grandfather Cole slept. Having grown up in my grandfather's house, I have a few of the possessions that came from the house that was on this property. You see, this is Cole's shaving box. Looks old and worn, but it's pretty old. See, I got the candlesticks. The candlesticks came from the house that was in this built on this property. I got a corner cupboard and a hat rack too, but I couldn't bring those. They were just a little too big. But anyway, I really appreciate. Oh, there was one other thing in that house, in my grandfather's house, that left 70 years ago, and I never expected to see it again. It came from this house. Was a mirror. Well, it's gone down through family and generations. So about a month ago, I got a call and says, "Ruth, would you like that mirror back?" Well, I haven't gotten it yet. As soon as I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to have that, and I'm really looking forward to it. And that is the beginning of our story on this property. Now I think it's up to you, right?
Monmouth Junction, what is today Monmouth Junction, is located in central South Brunswick. And what I'm going to show you are a couple of slides just depicting the areas surrounding present-day Monmouth Junction. This is, well, it's not what my notes say, but this is the rapidly disappearing open space that surrounds, that's in our town. This is looking out Ridge Road towards where the new high school is. The open space and the I see what happened. I'm missing my first slide. I had a slide of Von Thune's farm. That was just to give us an indication and a remembrance of the fact that the area really started with agriculture. And there's still a few remaining farms, but again, it's rapidly, rapidly disappearing as we become much more of just a urbanized, suburbanized community. This is now looking out East New Road as you go towards Sondeck Park. This is the Black Swamp, and this is, along with a lot of other wetlands in the area, feed the Lawrence Brook. It was originally known as the Piscopec Brook, and Ruth will be telling you a little bit of story about how the area became settled, and it is now known as Lawrence Brook. But Ruth, you have a story about the Black Swamp that you wanted to tell?
Oh, yeah, I got a story. I imagine most of you have heard of Huckleberry Finn, haven't you? Yeah? Have you ever heard of Huckleberry Joe? Well, I guess Joe, when he came back from the service, was yearning for some fresh berries. So he borrowed some boots, and he got a friend, and they went over to this Black Swamp. Well, Joe came home, but without any berries. He was lucky to get home, I'll tell you, because that is quicksand there. He was a lot luckier than a horse a little beforehand. Slipped in the quicksand, and that was the end of the horse. And this is right over a new road, and it's still there. The second horse did better, and the second horse belonged to the father of the carpenter who built our house. They learned when a horse goes into quicksand, you have to get a belt, put him around him, and you can pull him out. So the second horse was saved. And Joe's never gone huckleberrying again.
The Lawrence Creek runs down into, it actually connects a lot of the areas of South Brunswick, runs into Farrington Lake. It goes past Davidson's Mill into Farrington Lake, and then on into the Raritan. So it's very, very important waterway locally. Ruth is now going to give a little bit of the story of some of the early history of our place in South Brunswick.
After the age of explorers, South Brunswick lands were purchased by adventurous pioneers who saw the birth of the American dream. On October the 16th, 1693, the proprietors of the East Province of New Jersey gave to Peter Summons 15,600 acres of land. Now, the crisscross was originally belonging to South Brunswick, but finally, that went to that went to Plainsboro and Cranberry. We no longer had that. So what he received, Peter, was over half of the size of South Brunswick. The conveyance covered over one half of the present area. We were originally 26,880 acres, 42 square miles. Peter Summons came in with 15,600 acres, so the township had still 11,200 left. So, and Peter Summons in 1733 conveyed to Thomas Lauren 805 acres. If you notice, Monmouth Junction is coming right in the center of South Brunswick Township, and that's the reason you know, it didn't grow like the other villages did on the borders. There was Cranberry South River Road on that side, and the Georges Road, and Route 27, and Route 1 over there. But here we were right in the middle. And I guess people wondered, you know, really what's going to make that center wake up? But it did. Thomas Lawrence land extended from Stouts Lane to Kingston Lane. It was each side of Piscopec Creek. Now when Lawrence got the land, he changed the name to Longbridge Farm, and he called the brook Lawrence Brook. He married in 1733 and built a section of the house, his first house, in 1735.
I missed my cue.
Now, do you have about the headlines in the paper first?
Okay, that's what I was waiting for.
Yeah. In 1951, and this is history repeating itself, 50 years ago, the Monmouth Junction 5th and 6th graders researched South Brunswick, or Monmouth Junction, and they had a program presenting. And you can see Monmouth Junction children show growth of town in play. And that was 50 years ago. Well, out of that, the house, that is the side view of the first house that was built in Monmouth Junction. That house is recorded, or was recorded, in Book 58, page 31, located in the Middlesex County Courthouse. But when it went on microfilm, now all these records are in the county workhouse. And I haven't been there, so I haven't gotten up-to-date records. That was the first section. Now, on the second section of the house, a porch came, and that design there is a scroll work that was on the porch of the addition. Now, Mrs. Emmons, who was Ethel Michon, lived in that house, and if you notice there, it's the this is from the courtesy of Mrs. Emmons, where this early information came. During the Revolutionary War, Colonel Witherell trained horses for General Washington and the Continental Army on Longbridge Farm. The Journal of Jeremiah Greenman stated that the Army camped on Longbridge Farm June the 25th, 1778. And also, 2 Revolutionary War bayonets were found by Bill Zimmerman when they purchased the property in 1951 on their farm. And here they are. I don't know, is Janet here? Oh, Janet, yeah. I mean, Janet is Bill's daughter, and they're in her possession now. And here they are. So somehow or other, there had to be some activity on Longbridge Farm during the Revolutionary War.
It was the overnight encampment on their way to the Battle of Monmouth.
Yes, on the way to Monmouth, yes, that's right. Now, upon returning from, let me see, we got these in order. Upon returning from the War of 1812, a William Rowland, and there were so many Williams Rowland. There was William L., William B., William J., William R. I just know it was a William Rowland. Came to live in the area and bought Longbridge Farm in 1815. He married Catherine Stryker and had 2 sons, Lou and Stryker. At the age of 72, he decided that it was time to sell land. So in May 1852, he sold 88 acres to Hiram Landis. Now, Hiram Landis' house is where the Monmouth Junction School is now located on Ridge Road, the new Monmouth Junction School. I remember that old house because in there lived my Sunday school teacher. I mean, she had us on Sunday, but she thought we needed extras during the week, so she invited us to his house. And she would give us a little extra talk. But it was so charming and quaint in there, you know. We all loved to go, and I'll tell you, I think I learned so much in those years because she taught you to be patient, to love one another, be kind, think of others. And there are things that I said always stay with me all my life. And I give little old Mrs. Landis a lot of credit. Mr. Rowland died in 1857, leaving the remainder of the farm, 1,624 acres. That's right, to his son, Stryker Rowland. So now Longbridge Farm has increased from 805 acres to 1,860 acres. The years following his death, the year following his death is when his son, Stryker Rowland, that's Stryker, and he built the first store in Monmouth Junction on Railroad Avenue. And that is the first store. Now, many people here know that as Emmons' store, but there it was at the original time of
This would be 1858, Ruth? Is that correct?
1858, he built the store in Monmouth Junction.
Yeah.
What?
No, this, yes, right. There has to be a daguerreotype as well, wouldn't it?
Yes. So, now, is it your turn
Yep.
to step in now?
Yes.
All right, we're
What
up
I'd like to show, this is an older photo. Unfortunately, I guess maybe it's not really coming out too well. This is a view. Well, that's not going to work, so let me go to the current shot. This is the current shot of the Longbridge Farm house as it is today. A lot of people might recognize it, so I just wanted to give you a view of it so that you can kind of get a sense of where it is that we're talking about. What I'd like to pick up, though, is on the railroads. We are Monmouth Junction. The railroads have played a very, very important part in the development of Monmouth Junction. And it all goes back to 1815, when John Stevens of Hoboken was granted the first legislative grant to begin to develop a railroad. That would have been the Camden and Amboy line. Now, it wasn't until 1831 when the line actually was built, but it was the first legislative grant in the United States for a railroad. Unfortunately, the Baltimore and Ohio beat him out by a couple of months as to being the first operating rail line. So the Camden and Amboy is the second. What was, and here is the Camden and Amboy line running through Hightstown, Jamesburg. Back at the turn of the 19th century, roads were in deplorable shape, and the stagecoaches really held a monopoly on transportation. And so it was very expensive. The Union Line rail from, or the Union Line stage from New York to Philadelphia was $6, and it was an all-day trip. I'm sorry, it was a day and a half trip, and you would have to stay at Union Line approved hotels, and there were Union Line approved prices that you would have to pay. Everybody was very, very upset that they had a monopoly on transportation. The rails, which were starting to develop in England especially, that was an idea that really caught on as an alternative to the stagecoach travel. So In 1831, the Camden and Amboy was completed, linking Camden and Perth Amboy, actually I guess South Amboy, sorry. And it went through the neighboring areas of Hightstown, Jamesburg. There was a spur that was that ran off the Camden and Amboy line to Rocky Hill. And that was really the first rail line that came through the area that we now know as Monmouth Junction. That would have been in the 1830s. A little bit later on, in the 1860s, the Pennsylvania Railroad came through, and that's this line here, and that went right through where the present Monmouth Junction is. Then there was a connecting line, the Jamesburg and Freehold agricultural line, which you can see right here. That went to Dayton, and in the 1860s there was a spur added that connected it to Monmouth Junction. So really, the area started to develop because of the railroads. This is a picture of the first railroad station that was built in 1861. And this was in service until 1890, when the second station was built. That's the 1890s station. And here's a slightly better shot of it. Well, it's going to be a little dark. Maybe we'll leave this one on. The railroads really helped bring prosperity to the area. It allowed the farmers to have a greater access to larger markets. It allowed machined goods to come into the area, and there was an increased prosperity. It was a two lines on the main track through the 1860s, and in the 1890s was expanded to 4 lines. The Freehold and Jamesburg agricultural line was extended, as I said, in 1865 to connect with the main line and that was the emerging village of Monmouth Junction. In the 1860s and the late 19th century, this was the time of awakened interest in going to the shore, in beach kinds of activities. This was really what put the Monmouth in Monmouth Junction, was our link now down to Freehold and down to Monmouth County. There a report a little bit later on by Richard Stout saying that he routinely would see trains coming in from the west, and you would get 500 people changing trains at Monmouth Junction to get onto that Freehold line and down to the shore. The Rocky Hill spur was really more for freight. Now here's the Rocky Hill station, and this was really to transport the stone from the quarry. That was its primary function. There were a few passenger lines that ran on it, but it was mostly a freight line. Because of its origins around the railroad, Monmouth Junction really developed along a slightly different pattern than most of the other 19th century villages in South Brunswick. This was the first village that was really planned as a development. The houses and the lots were set out on a grid pattern, and it didn't really follow the pattern of rural expansion that was present in most of our other towns. That's just a shot of, you can see, well, there's the Jamesburg spur going off to the left, and it's just, there were a lot of switching and a lot of activity. Tony Sanawasa might be able to tell us a little bit more after the break when he talks about life working on the railroad. Now, with the railroad came the businesses that were associated with it. And what I'd like to do, well, this is the station It's not a station, it's just the switching tower as it stands today, and it's called Midway. We are midway between New York and Philadelphia. I'd like to just back up a little bit, because there was a very important family in the area, and that's the Stout family. Jack Stout, married Eliza Ann Farmer Stout. They had some property around in the area where what is now Route 1. He had a tavern and a blacksmith shop that served, I don't have a firm date on this, but it served the wagons before Route 1. So I have to assume that it was there before 1804 when the straight as a narrow turnpike from New Brunswick to Trenton was first being built. Around 1834, he acquired a significant piece of property near Stout's Lane that went from what we now know as Route 1 all the way to Ridge Road. This is the second house that was on the property. The original house is no longer here. This Stout house was built in 1863 by Arnold Farmer Stout and his wife, Annie Eliza Van Zandt. The property that the Stout farm is now where the site of the new high school is. And in 1842, Augustus Stout started a feed and lime business, and I have to get this correct here. Oh, sorry. There we go. This is now, in 1842, he started the, I've got to get this correct here. He's a dealer in lime, I.P. Thomas & Company phosphates, brewer's grains, agricultural machinery, all farm produce, and lumber and building supplies. So he started this in 1842 with his father, Jack. Later on, it was taken over by Arnold Farmer Stout. Now, Arnold Farmer Stout is the gentleman that you see here. This photo was probably taken in the about 1890. That's Arnold Farmer Stout. That's Arnold Farmer Stout II. You really can't see him there. And this is Augustus Van Zandt Stout, who would have been his son. This is located across the street from where Oil Co. is today, or Computer Depot. And let's see, I think I've got my... And in the 1890s, that would have moved across the street to where Oil Co. is. In the bottom is another photograph of Arnold and Annie Stout. Okay, this is where the lumber yard is up until 1962, and the red barn across the street was the wheelwright. The first blacksmith shop and wheelwright shop in Monmouth Junction was operating about 1880s, might have been a little bit earlier. Again, I don't have a firm date on this, but it was built by Joshua Emmons and run by Peter Emmons for many years. The one-story section, which was the blacksmith shop, is no longer existing, but this two-story section has been added onto and is the red barn that is across the street from Oil Co. And right there. So that still exists. Ruth?
What a story.
Sure.
The wheelwright shop was the big red building, right?
Yes.
Red, this is what you might have found in a wheelwright shop. Anybody know what it is? No water, not a pump. You're smart. This, this was a carriage jack in those days. This is the kind of jack they had to lift up the wheel or whatever they were working on. And this was made by Peter Emmons from the blacksmith shop. Somehow he took a liking to me when I was very little, and I got the chair. All right, that's all for now. I'll stop you again.
So these were the businesses that were growing up around the area, especially related to the increased railroad traffic. Now, in 1871, the Monmouth House Hotel was built by John H. Martin, and it was occupied by John Shreve until 1876, James Higgins after that, and Matt Zielinski after that. It burned down in 1922. Now, this would have been right alongside the rails across from where the railway station was. It was locally famous and apparently quite the hotspot for Princetonites who wanted to get a little bit out of town and maybe revel a little more heartily than they would if they were staying in Princeton. That burned down in 1922. And Ruth, now we're going to go to the beginning of the development of the area known as Monmouth Junction.
In 1877, I'm going back to Stryker Rowland now. Remember, he inherited his father's 1,640 acres, and he sold a lot to my grandfather, and in 1877, and that's the deed, and that's the mortgage for the lot that is on the corner of Walnut Street and Ridge Road. Now, from there, we're going to go to Longbridge Farm again, and just the land surrounding it, the house and the land surrounding, was sold to Harvey Michon. His wife was Carrie Rowland. You always seem to find a Rowland in any of the, the activities that went on. The remainder of that property fell into the possession, the hands of Isaac B. Rowland, James E. Rowland, and C. Groves. Now, C. Groves happened to be the daughter of Andrew Rowland. So that's Andrew. His daughter was part of the new developers of Monmouth Junction, and there the land was all divided into lots. This is the first sign, a really sign of development. You have the lots? Yeah, the blue.
Right. Yeah, I was doing both, and I did try. Oh, okay, so it is much lighter. I see, okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you have the blue lot? I mean, the paper with
Yes, I do, but I'm going to hold that up.
All right.
Just as an orientation, this is where the railroad tracks are. That's the main Penn Central line.
Now, here is really the original map from 1895 when the Rowlands started to develop Monmouth Junction.
And the creases in the map are the black lines that you're seeing on the projected figure.
Now, remember my grandfather bought a lot at the corner of Ridge Road and Walnut Avenue. That was in 1877. Well, when the lots came for sale in 1895, he wished to purchase a lot next to it just to have more room for the house. Well, there was another family by the name of Grundyke, And somehow they wanted the same lot that my grandfather wanted next to his house. Nevertheless, Pop got the lot somehow. Grundyke bought the lot next to that and an extra one. But they were so annoyed that this showed them the
This is the Grundyke's house?
That's the Grundyke house, and that was my grandfather's house.
That's the Roland Weaver Spataro house.
So they were really so mad that on that side of the Grundyke house, they never put any windows. But years ago, as the children grew up, they all turned out to be friends again. But, you know, these sounds like stories, but, you know, we got to really document all these stories. So that is the start of the development in
What I'd like to
Junction.
show are just some current day photographs. This is how the Grundyke house as it stands today. Later, Schonleys lived there. You hear the same names over and over and over again. So we're on Walnut Street in Monmouth Junction. This is the Roland Weaver Spataro house. 5 generations of Rolands lived there, Ruth, is that correct? From
Yeah, 4 or 5,
1877?
yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. And as we cross the street and look at the other side, I wish I had a more current photograph. This was taken a couple of years ago when it was just being started to be restored. I wish I had a photograph of just a year before that, because even this is so much progress. I am so pleased. This is the William Emmons house, later the McKeon house. We're coming up Walnut Street, heading towards Ridge Road, and this is the Bud Emmons bungalow. And I think this is a wonderful example of the late 19th century diversity in architectural styles that was happening. Not only due to the prosperity, people were also, the fashion of the time was to be a little bit more whimsical. And I just love that house. Now this house is the McDowell house, and again, I wish I had a more current picture of this, because the current owner, Connie Schonley, is really doing a super job of restoring it and cleaning up and making it really beautiful. This house was probably built somewhere between 1860s and 1880s. We don't have a firm date. McDowell, who was the owner of the house when we first moved in, swore that his grandfather had built the house and it was pre-Civil War. We have other information that says that it was probably built somewhere around 1880. We don't know. We would encourage anybody who has any information, would love to hear, so that we can firm up some of these dates and some of the history that we have. Now, I'll have to say, this is the house that I'm most partial to in Monmouth Junction. This is the house that I get to mow the lawn and shovel the snow. This is the Arnold Farmer Stout house. Arnold Farmer Stout, as you recall from just a couple of minutes ago, he was the proprietor of the lumber yard and the lime and feed and all of that. He was living in the second Stout house, the 1863 Stout house, which still exists on Ridge Road. And in the early 1890s, he built this house and he moved into it with his wife, Annie. Now, we have a key blank that's dated February 10th, 1891. We assume that that is probably a vanity engraving for when they entered the house. There's other information out there that says that they didn't move in until 1895. We don't know. It's clearly a late Queen Anne, an embellished Queen Anne, that would certainly be appropriate to the early 1890s. Locally, it's known as the Pearson House. Elbert C. Pearson and his wife, Lafretta Schonley, lived there for well over 50 years, and Elbert C. Pearson was the town clerk for 34 years. And so a lot of people remember going through the side porch and the side door there, where they would be getting fishing licenses and whatever they would need. This house is the house next door to that, and it's the site of the former Mechanics Hall. Now, Mechanics Hall, how am I going to do this? Mechanics Hall was the site of the social center of Monmouth Junction. This is where all the graduations would be. This is where the dances would be held. The Mechanics was a fraternal order, and that building was built in about 1898, 1900. Again, the date is not completely firm. And it existed as the center, as I said, for the hub of activity for the town up until 1949 when it burned down. Ruth is going to come back to it when she discusses after the break the 20th century, her experiences and reflections on living in Monmouth Junction in the 20th century. And we'll come back and talk about Mechanics Hall a little bit then. This is the Bracken Williams house. Again, it's on Ridge Road. Currently, it's owned by Bob and Mary Williams. It was built by Bill Carlisle. Again, it's in the Queen Anne style and probably built around 1880. There's Ruth. Do you want to tell this story? This is a great little story here. This is not a photograph of the first car in Monmouth Junction. However, we did have, along with one of the early cars, well, Ruth, you can tell the story.
No, this is the second car.
This is the second car, okay.
By the way, in the car to the left is Nell Emmons. That's the daughter of W.W. Emmons, who was running the store. That's my mother. And that side's my grandfather, and the other side is in the back there is W.W. Emmons. But Mr. Stout in the house, you know, that Dennis has now, he was the first person in town to have a car, and he's very, very proud of it. And when you know, he was backing out of that driveway, and at the same time, a car came down Ridge Road, smacked into it, and his whole car went in splinters. And it was so unbelievable. No other car on the road. But you see, no stop signs or anything, well, and he just went his merry way.
Ruth, if I could editorialize a little bit, please. Slow down around that corner, okay?
Yeah. And that was the end of the first car. But knowing Farmer Stout, I knew him well. He got another car.
Actually, Ruth, you might as well stay here. This is William J. Rowland built this house, and it's known as the Honeymoon Cottage. Again, it's probably late 1880s to 1890s. We're not completely sure on the date. But Ruth, you must tell this story.
Well, right now, the house across the street is a funeral home. That house used to be William J.'s home, and he grew up there with his wife and son, William B. Rowland. Well, when the school opened in Monmouth Junction in 1902, a girl by the name of Emma Morton came from Trenton to be the teacher. And it wasn't long before William B. Rowland had an eye on her, and they were having a great time. But Mr. Rowland's wife had died. And so somehow, little by little, she worked her way into the old man and let the young man go. Because the story is she knew a money bag when she saw it. And that was right. So there she is. And that's Emma Morton and Mrs. William J. Rowland, and you know, so she married William J. Rowland. Her son was so furious. His son was so furious that his father would do that to him. He built those English Square now, those barns across the way. So she would have to sit in her house and look at that barn the rest of her life. And she did. And at that time, it was farm implements and so on. But that's the story. But while we have her up there, Mrs. Rowland was the first woman mayor in South Brunswick Township. She was mayor in 1930 and 1931. And the reputation is Tony Santawas in the audience? Yes. Where are you, Tony? Oh, there you are. Hey, what can you tell about Mrs. Rowland getting things done?
She was a very powerful woman. I can remember my father saying that if politics are hard on you, it wasn't money, whatever it was, he would go out and meet people in school, and he seemed to like him and the way he filed, and he was able to help start.
I mean, if you want something done, just go to Emma Rowland. Well, she worked it right with the father, so she's worked it right with the town, too. So, she was a good person, though.
Thank you, Ruth. This is the, what is now Murphy's Funeral Home, and this was William B., this was the son's house, correct?
Well, that was the father's house.
Oh, the father's house first.
Originally, and William B. lived there with his father. His mother died.
Okay.
And then William J. built the new house across the street.
Right.
Then William B. built the barns.
Too many Rowlands. It's been quipped that if Monmouth Junction wasn't known as Monmouth Junction, it would certainly be known as Rowlandville. The columns are certainly not original to the house. I don't know exactly when they were put in, but probably in the 60s. Just continuing down Ridge Road a little bit, there was another growth spurt in the early 20th century. A lot of houses about, from the 1900s to the 1910s into the 1920s were built. And I just wanted to give you a sense of what some of the architecture is as you go down along Ridge Road. These are early 20th century homes. I really like this one. It's indicative of craftsman style. It's a little unique in the area. Now this series of homes was known as Hungry Hill. This is across from what where the post office is now. And these were built by the Pennsylvania Railroad as workers' homes. And they were known as Hungry Hill because the people that worked there, they weren't the engineers or the brakemen. They were the lower level people that worked on the railroad, and not quite as affluent as some of the others that lived a little bit closer to Walnut Street. But it's still, it's just a great little section, Hungry Hill. We've now gone across the railroad tracks to a section of town which is referred to as the Bowery. It's referred to as the Bowery because it was on the other side of the tracks. It was very much a vital part of Monmouth Junction, really until the new bridge was built in the 50s. And this is a great example of looking at planning to solve one problem and it causes another. The new bridge relieved traffic that was on Old New Road. But what it did was it made it more difficult now for the people who lived on the other side of the tracks to feel like they were part of the community. And so now it almost seems like it's a little forgotten, and it's very sad. We need to be very careful in how we plan our development. This house is the Breese House. This was built in 1873, and it's actually rather characteristic of a lot of houses that you see in the area. Originally, it would have had 5 windows across, would have been called, 5-bay. The window was taken out when the bathroom was put in, probably in the 1880s to 1890s. Now, I wish I had a better picture of this, but this is again on Old New Road. We're heading back towards the railroad tracks now, but from the other side. And what I'd like to point out is the white house that you see as the second one in. That was the site and actually the building of the first church in Monmouth Junction. The first church was built in 1877 by James Hunt. Nominally, it was a Methodist church, but it was open to any denomination. It didn't prosper, unfortunately, and I have to apologize. My better picture of the church is at home, but we might be able to get a sense of I can't seem to get the focus exactly how I'd like it. But that white building that I just originally was, what I just pointed out to you, was that 1877 church. As it didn't fare well, it was left with a debt of $480. The Methodist Episcopal Conference sold the church to Reverend John Miller in 1884 for $482. So they were able to cover their debt and made a $2 profit. He organized the Evangelical Church of Monmouth Junction, and ran it successfully until he died in 1895. His three daughters then deeded the property to the trustees of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and in 1906, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church and the Presbyterian Church of the United States had merged, and the little church became known as the First Presbyterian Church of Monmouth Junction. The name changed to the Miller Memorial Presbyterian Church when the last of Reverend Miller's daughters died and bequeathed the church $13,500. Quite a significant sum back then. The church was renamed in honor of the family. There was another church in town, St. Paul's Episcopal Church, which was built in 1899. And by 1938, its congregation had moved on to other churches, and the church was vacant. And that's when Miller Memorial Presbyterian Congregation moved from the 1877 church to this location, and this is now Miller Memorial Presbyterian. There was St. Cecilia's Catholic Church, and Ruth, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Up on the hill where the municipal building is was a house. It was a big house, and it was a Shekinah house. It was a big house and full of a lot of Shekinahs, that time. And that's where the first Catholic church services were held. And when they outgrew that house, Mr. Cale owned the farm back of the old Catholic church. He gave them his barn to have church services in. Now, that is a picture of the Catholic congregation around 1912 in front of Cale's barn. At that time, Mr. Cale owned the farm, so he gave them the property to build a new Catholic church on.
Ah, here we go. There we go. I just learned the secret.
Do you have the deed for that property? Here's the deed, the original deed of the property that Mr. Cale gave to the church to build the new church. However, the men in town, they dug the basement of that church, they did the foundation, they worked so hard, and they really had the most beautiful church going. 1914 it opened, and a few years ago it disappeared, and I think that's one of the saddest things that has happened. The developer made a deal. He would leave it there for community, for community use. Somehow overnight that church disappeared, and they worked so hard. I knew a lot, I knew a lot of the men that worked, did the basement of that church, did the foundation.
The church building disappeared, of course.
Yeah, the
St.
church.
Cecilia's is a vibrant,
So now they moved
community.
to the new St. Cecilia's church. You have a picture of the
No,
new?
I'm sorry. That's with the 1877 church.
Oh, well, there's a beautiful new church down
Yes.
on George's
There are
Road.
some photographs of the new church on the table in the back.
Yes, there's,
If you want to take a look at them during the break.
they came from the old church, some memo, so you can look at that at the break time.
Maybe we can switch gears now, since we just talked about the churches in Monmouth Junction, and talk a little bit about the education in Monmouth Junction. And Ruth, there's nobody more qualified than yourself as being a educator
Well,
from Monmouth Junction.
I gotta go through this fast. Now you must remember, Monmouth Junction here now, it started to develop. Up to this time, all around the outskirts of South Brunswick Township, the border, little one-room schools had started in the 1700s, you know, the 1780s, the 1800s. There were 12 one-room schools in working order in South Brunswick Township. Monmouth Junction didn't have a school yet, and here was 1888. So in 1888, the state and the county formed a district for Monmouth Junction schools. They picked the trustees. The first meeting was held June the 12th, 1888. The second meeting was held June the 24th, voted for the purpose of a new school. $2,000 was allotted for the land and the school. The lot cost $250, and the building cost $840. It opened on January the 2nd, 1898, with 30 pupils. But the odd thing of it is, in 1902, that's just a few years from, another school was built. That school was dedicated Saturday, May the 1st in Mechanics Hall. It opened November the 3rd. And that school stayed in use until the new Monmouth Junction School was built on and opened in 1951. Now, the first aid, that school was purchased by the first aid squad in 1952. But here is the big mystery. In that school, every morning at 8:45 in the four-room school that you just saw, the early bell would ring. It was an honor for somebody to be chosen for the week to get to school and ring that bell. And at 9 o'clock, the regular bell would ring, and if you weren't there by 9 o'clock, you were late. And so when the first aid bought that, the first aiders, that's Roger Potts and Bill Vorse, they took that bell down, they presented it to the Board of Education at the Crossroads School. And from that day to this, nobody's ever found that bell. And I don't like that. That bell really belongs in front of one of our schools. And I traced and looked high and low, every lead that I could over the years to find that bell. Because that was a piece of history, and somebody's got it who knows none of the history of the school system. But it was interesting how a school opened in 98 and in 1902. Now I'm surmising something. I'm surmising that when that school opened in 98, it was across the railroad tracks. It was down Old Ridge Road where the Catholic Church used to be, that little road that goes down there. And all the children had to cross that railroad to get over to school. And I think after about 2 years of that, the people in Monmouth Junction said it was a mistake to have built a school here. And that is the reason in 1902, the four-room school opened. No, not that. The four-room school opened in 1992. You know, we have a knack in this township building schools in the wrong places.
Of course, this is the 1951 school, and Ruth, your mother was principal?
My mother was principal in the four-room school for years and years. She retired after 47 years, and Oh, that's, oh, wait a minute. There's Mrs. Rowland. Remember Emma Morton? The one who married William J.? There she is. That was, and that was my mother when she retired. And that's my mother when she started teaching as a girl, as 18.
With that, we'd like to close the first section of the history of Monmouth Junction. When we come back, Tony Santawasu is going to give a little bit of the reflections of his life growing up in Monmouth Junction, and Ruth will come back and give some of her reflections on her life in the 20th century of Monmouth Junction. So I guess it's time for, oh, well, Ellen, I'll let you do this.
No, I just wanted to say that last time we had the presentation on Dayton, and I said Monmouth Junction was going to be today, a woman came forward, Mrs. Sylvia Ulshafer, and she said, I have some things from the original St. Cecilia's Church. Would you like me to bring them? And I said, if you can, that will be wonderful. And generously she did, and they're on a table in the back, and I invite you to see them during break or later. And also, Tony Santawasu, who will be speaking in a few minutes after break, brought some things from the railroad, and I think you have more, don't you, Tony? You disappeared on me before and scared me to death. I didn't know where you were. But anyway, he has some things from the railroad that you'll find very interesting, in addition to what Ruth and Joe Spataro brought in today. But before I forget, I would just like to remind you, at every presentation, we've had in the background the Afghan that was made for the bicentennial celebration. And on that Afghan, there are 3 of the buildings that we're talking about today. Mechanics Hall is one of them, the Monmouth Junction 1902 school, and what is the other one, Ruth? The railroad station. But I'd also like to point out to you about that 1902 school. The record book that Dennis showed you has been held because Ruth's grandfather was the town clerk, and he was the one who had charge of that record book. So that's been in her family because I would imagine the town clerk office was in the house, so it didn't leave the house. And you can look at it, but you can't touch it because the papers are yellow. You know, the cover is in good condition, but the papers are very fragile. So I invite you to browse. And getting back to the Afghan, I understand the township has a few of them left for sale if anyone is interested. They're $35. They had been $40, and they are available at the municipal building. Seal, are there any at the library? The clerk's office, right. And also, our township historian, Seal Leadham, updated the display in the lobby as you go out. Please don't miss her display of Monmouth Junction today because she worked hard to do it and she does a lovely job. Okay, so have some tea and cookies. I have handouts today, yes. Some people ask me about them, and I'm so happy because you know what? One of them is on Monmouth Junction, which you heard a lot about already, but the other one is on the history of the Monmouth Junction Fire Company in fire engine red, please. Don't miss it. Okay? See you later.
Right.
Sometime I'm going to break in and tell about Paris.
Okay, yes.
Don't mind me breaking in.
No, no, go ahead. Yeah, it makes it more interesting. Yes, it is.
1 hour, While Tasso's fixing the projector, hi Joan, I'll just tell you that I have 2 copies here of information on Monmouth Junction that Reverend John Maltby was kind enough to give to us. He actually gave me 5 copies, but 3 of them are gone already. I'll leave them on the table if anyone's interested. It's a series of articles about Monmouth Junction that you might enjoy reading about. But I'll use one of the articles. Ready, Santa? I have this one. I have Brothers Recall Railroad Echoes, and the brothers are the Santawassa brothers. And we're fortunate to have with us today, whom I did not introduce earlier because he decided to go home for something, and I didn't know if he was coming back. But we have Tony Santawassa, and he told me that he grew up 20 feet from the railroad track. His dad was a railroader. He himself was a railroader for 6 years, and 5 of his uncles were railroaders. Who better to talk to us about life in Monmouth Junction in the era of the railroads? Tony Santawassa.
Hi, how you doing? I feel I was very lucky to grow up in Monmouth Junction. The story that I got, how my family came to Monmouth Junction, my grandfather loved to hunt, and he lived in Trenton. He knew a man named Mr. Delray in Monmouth Junction. He would come here to go hunting. One day he came back from Monmouth Junction and told my grandmother to pack up all her belongings and grab the kids. They're moving to Monmouth Junction. He had a deed for a house there. So that's how my family came to South Brunswick. He also had a Italian grocery business. He used to go on a horse and wagon, go through Monmouth Junction, Deans, I believe Dayton, and sell vegetables to people. Then he opened a bar in Monmouth Junction right next to the railroad tracks on New Road. It's called, I think, Old New Road now, but they keep changing the names of New Road so much I don't know exactly what they call it. It's between the tower, which was the interlocking tower, it's called the switching station, and its train station in Monmouth Junction. That's the bar was down closest to the tracks, and the little white door was a package store at the end, but it was also an ice cream store and a candy store. So like I say, I was very, very lucky when I grew up. Didn't have to pay for ice cream, didn't have to pay for candy. And right next to the bar was a gateman who used to raise and lower the gates. And I used to, as a child, 4 or 5 years old, I would sit in there and talk to the gateman, and he would tell my stories. I'd watch the trains come by. And I was also very lucky to be able to ride the steam engine that went down to the Kingston branch. The engineer, his name was Greeny, and I don't know what his real name was, but that was his name, and he would take me on the engine, and I would ride up and down the freight yard, and that was the way I spent part of my childhood. We swam in the reservoir. That's where we learned to swim. I think you remember the big towers that Ruth was showing you before. This is a picture of my father's bar. It was very small. It was in a U shape. On the side closest to me was the Plainsboro side, and the other side was the Monmouth Junction side. And it was like a lot of camaraderie there. And this was a fundraiser my father had started for the March of Dimes. And I don't know if you can see it, but down the side there's like 6 or 8 rows of dimes on each side. And that guys would come in and they'd get a beer. I think a beer was 10 cents at the time. And they would put their extra money, and they would have a war between Plainsboro and South Brunswick to see who could raise the most money. My father took me to work with him. He ran a bar at night, but he worked on the railroad as an electrician in communications and signals. And he would take me, and I learned a lot of locations as a kid just driving along with him. And I'll never forget the time that from Jamesburg to South Amboy, he put me on the largest steam engine with the train crew, and they took me all the way down from Jamesburg all the way into South Amboy, and he picked me up down there. They had a coal dumper where the train cars would come in. They'd pick the cars and turn them upside down and dump the coal out of the trains and put the train back on the track, and it would just go back and forth and make up another train. They also had a turnaround, engine house down there where they could turn the engines around. But in Monmouth Junction, they had a Y, and there's this is a, thank you, Dennis. This is a schematic of the Pennsylvania Railroad, the Jamesburg branch. This is a Y turnaround. This is the Kingston branch, and I am not aware of what this was. There was a freight yard over here, and it was Bennett and Clayton's, and it was another name before that. In one of the old books we have over here, it tells us what the name was. And this area here was all freight yard, and the train stations were here, the reservoir where they got water for the old steam engines, and many kids in Monmouth Junction learned how to swim in that reservoir. It was a great place to grow up. Thank you. And Monmouth Junction, my father said, was one of the only towns that went backwards. When he was a little kid, they had a bakery. There were 2 gas stations right next to the bar. There were Kish's store, Emmons's store, Melfi's store by the old firehouse. There were just so much to do in Monmouth Junction. Every kid knew everybody. I mean, anywhere from Route 1 into Dayton, everybody knew everybody. They had a good time together. You could hunt, you could fish, and it was just a great place to grow up. Mrs. Weaver, Mrs. Pataro's mother, taught for many, I forget how many years she said, close to 50, I guess, right?
27.
She taught my mother's side of the family, were about 8 or 9 there, and I think there were 8 on my father's side, and she taught my sisters and my cousins and myself in all those years that we lived in Monmouth Junction. Everybody had Mrs. Weaver. I had her for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And she was a tough teacher, let me tell you. Some of the things on the railroad were, these are magnetophones, and a lot of people have seen them on television. You crank them, and at every location where a tower or a single bridge, the train crews would use these phones to call to get their orders. This is before radios were very popular at the time. This is a insulator that opens up on the top, and the wires come down to the telephones, and it keeps them from breaking the wires because they can take the strain in here much better. This is another type of insulator. The wires get tied to the side, and I had a few with PRR, but I just couldn't find them on those now. This, and I'm not exactly sure if this is off an engine or a caboose or a signal, because it has a red on one side and then like 2 blue lenses over here. But as I grew up, my father, like I said, he would take me along, and he taught me a lot about the railroad. And in 3 years, I became his boss. That's how much he taught me. But he got very mad at me when I left the railroad and became a police officer in South Brunswick, but that was where my priorities were. I was the 18th member in my family to go on a railroad, between my mother's side and my father's side. I think that's about all I can tell you now. Thank you.
Tony thought he had it tough with Mrs. Weir. Well, how do you think I had it? I was her daughter, and she had me. And there's one story he forgot about the bar. It was a wonderful place. You got double dips for 5 cents. I remember again. This was before Tony's time, I'm telling you about. And, you know, you walk down the street there, and who was there but a parrot? And you'd always say, "Hello, Polly." And Polly had a very limited vocabulary. She always had one answer: go to hell. These are true stories, too. Let's see. Well, I'm going back now from the beginning of the 20th century and what I remember first, and I'll do it very quickly. We'll go through the century fast. The first things I remember are the troop trains on the right side of us with the fellow, no air conditioning, then old steam engine. I can remember the soldiers always hanging out waving as they went through town. And on the left side was Ridge Road. It was a dirt road, and lumbering was the occupation of those days. Beautiful trees were cut down. The woods were all cut down here. And they were drawn by horses. They were horse-drawn wagons. And they went to make, for the jetties at the shore, and they were to make ties for the railroad. That's what the lumber was used. At the same period, in the St. Paul's Church, the women of the town would meet every day. And they would roll bandages, they would knit socks, they would knit face cloths. And I mean, I would go there every day with my mother and, you know, spend the time seeing all these women work so hard for the soldiers that were overseas. I have a copy of the book with all the soldiers' name in. Maybe you know. This is the account that was kept of the book, and here it has the names of all the men from Monmouth Junction that were in World War I. Now I know Dick Stout's name is in there. I mean, he was one that you've heard about. Oh, yeah, there it is. That's coming up pretty well. But there's the fellow. There I am with Russell Carlisle. His name's down there. I remember when he was in the service, and I had my picture taken with him. It was a very routine way of life at that time. It reminded me of the song, Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush, because every Monday morning, this is what you would do. Remember this? Maybe you don't. You'd always wash the clothes on Monday morning. There'd be 2 big tubs on the bench. You'd heat the water on the cold stove with the old wash boiler, and then you'd wash in one tub, you'd rinse in the other tub, and then put the clothes out on the line. You know what would happen? The drill would come there, and they'd be full of cinders, and then they would have to go. Week after week, that went on. I mean, this is what we really had to put up with in those days. But the railroad was good for the town. Now on Tuesday morning, you'd iron the clothes. Hey, well, Joe, where are the irons? I brought 2 sad irons. I bet you forgot to bring them in. That's my job. I knew there was something missing. Well, anyway, I can't imagine how, but that's the way you would iron with those sad irons. You put them on the stove, get them hot, take one off, and
Ruth, I'm sorry. While Joe was getting the irons, did you maybe want to tell about your remembrance of being in Arnold
look,
Farmer
I'll
and
go
Annie's
right
house?
on and I'll pick him up.
Okay.
I'll pick him when he comes. I'll pick the sad arms up when he comes in. And of course, at this time in Monmouth Junction, there was a terrible polio epidemic. So many children in town had polio. And so all parents did with their children, I remember you get scrubbed about 3 times a day to keep the germs away. Well, what happened at this time, we were very notorious for the manure dump. Now, from all the horses in New York and from all the horses in Philadelphia, they came down that railroad Rocky Hill siding, and all along the siding was a terrible manure dump. And you can imagine what the flies were. Somehow, that got removed from town. I wouldn't be surprised at the time Emma Rowland got to be mayor and she got the manure above the roof. But anyway, it's gone. But I remember those days because you couldn't go anywhere. When I see children go, sure enough, here he comes. You set sad on when I see children go to the, just take a minute. You can have a half a minute. What is it?
When Ruth picks on me at home, I always say I forgot. Well, here's proof I forgot.
I'll tell you. Well, now set them up now. No, where did I leave off here? Well, anyway, the big social event of the evening, and it was Saturday evening in town. Remember, there were no radios. There was really nothing. You would go and visit your neighbors. So one night I'd go to the Grundykes, and next night I'd go to the Stouts. Well, the Stouts lived in that house, and I remember I'd go in that front door, and Mrs. Stout would come over, and you were very elegant. The only thing you had was a Victor Victrola. And then she had the nicest Victrola in that hallway, and she'd come over and say, now what do you want me to play? And why I said it, I don't know, but every night I'd say, I'd like you to play Darling Nellie Gray. So she'd get it out, and she'd play Darling Nellie Gray, and then I'd probably go sit in the chair till it was time to go home, go to sleep, and that sort of social life. What a difference children have today, where they live and work and play. Um, in the mornings, I would watch the children go up Ridge Road to pick potatoes. And I could stand there no longer. So one morning, I joined the group. I just slipped right into the group. I wasn't 5 then, I know. Well, my parents were frantic. Here I skipped town, and they didn't know where. Somehow they find me, and I remember they said, well, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Frank Town to pick potatoes. And I said, well, I got taken home. But shortly after that, it didn't teach me a lesson. Remember that old hotel? I always was curious. That was right across the street from me, what it looked like in that hotel. So I went and visited the hotel. And I remember the man in there, Mr. Solinsky, was the owner. And he gave me a cloth, and I was dusting tables. So my mother came over and found me dusting tables in the hotel. But you know what? It was many, many years before my mother ever let me out of her sight again. In the time, there were no organized sports or amusements in town. The best thing for us was a good old snowstorm and the good cold weather, and we'd go sleigh riding and skating on Stout's Pond. World War II ended, and thoughts turned towards home and to the needs of the village. First online was the Darktown Minstrels. Now, there was a saying for years in town, this town is as dark as a bull's belly. Well, I'll tell you, the women got working, they organized the minstrels, and, well, there's one of their programs. They got a director, they were really terrific, and they took them to Cranberry and to Rocky Hill and to Dayton. They traveled, and they made enough money to get street lights in Monmouth Junction. Few and far between, but it was street lights. You know, in those days you had to work for everything. I mean, there was no money from the township to get anything. So, I think about 4 years they had the Darktown Minstrels to get the street lights. In 1922, I remember the night the hotel burned down. And I remember standing in the window and watching it go up in smoke. And to get any help, and you can imagine what a good start it had, the fire companies had to come from Cranberry. They had to come from Rocky Hill. And Lanes knows where else, but I mean, they're the only fire companies we ever had, and by the time they got there, it was ashes, really. And so after that, in 1924, is when the men in town said, it's time we organized a fire company. They did. So they had to earn money. So at that time, there was a little activity. Each summer, there was a big fireman's carnival, and it was big. Good music, all kind of stands, all kind of refreshments. And between the fireman carnival, and then they got the idea of minstrels. They ran a minstrel, too. So, and then in 1927, after the minstrels, do you have a picture of the minstrels?
Yes, I do. It's a later picture, though.
Oh, well, that's
We
right.
don't have
This is
the
one of the
early.
minstrels.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was really, those minstrels went on for a few years. And Betty Brapson, Betty Courtney was at the piano. She did all the accompaniment for the music. And that's Betty. And that's Sterl Brapson, her brother, playing the banjo. But it was great. Everybody looked forward to every year to the carnival and the Fireman's Minstrel Show. So that's the first fire engine that came to town. That was, you know, isn't it a shame we don't have that? We lose all the good things. We lost the church and we lost the fire company. I mean, the first fire engine. It was just a little tanker, but it just seemed so wonderful to have something in town to protect you if you had to. That came to town in January in a snowstorm. I remember riding down Ridge Road. I remember because, you know, in Walnut Avenue there's a house that they're fixing up, and the garage has a plastic blue roof over it. Well, I knew I'd get my foot in it. Well, that's the truth. Well, anyway, that was That was a firehouse for many, many years until they built the first firehouse up Ridge Road. I used to know all the people in town. I don't Well, anyway, so they had raised the money, and look what they have now. If you go to the new firehouse, I bet New York doesn't have what our new firehouse, that any of the firehouses have around this township now. So then, the first aid was organized in 1941. That's the first engine. Well, they had to raise money. No money from the township for that engine. Of course, it was secondhand, but it was great. And that was 1941. 1942 comes along, bang, the war. So the women had to shoulder the work. The women, what the first aiders would do, you'd hear the bell ringing in Sunday morning, and they'd be around collecting newspapers, and they collect newspapers, and then they take them and put them in the barn, Mrs. Rowland's barn, and then they would have to be all tied up and wait. And the women took over that, and the women had to become first aiders because there wasn't anybody left to drive the ambulance. And see what they turned out to be? Now that's 47, there they are. They always answered to the call, no matter what it was. The people in Monmouth Junction were there to help. And I think what is most rewarding to me is to see how, you say, well, who's going to carry after I'm gone? Well, I'll tell you, the firemen and the first aid have done a wonderful job in carrying on with the new generation that comes. They have new ideas, they have new, but where would it be if you waited for all the old people? We wouldn't have anything. But the only thing we did, we gave them the foundation on which to start, I will say that. And I think it's just wonderful how the newcomers have just stepped in and taken charge of things. And the same way with the bicentennial. Look, most of the people that worked on that centennial were new people in town. They were so interested, so thrilled with what took place. And look at Dennis. How long you been here, Dennis?
12 years.
He's been here 12 years, Look at the work he's done. Look at the interest he's taken in the town. And to me, that is one of the biggest rewards of all the work that we, did in town. So briefly, I took you right through my life in Monmouth Junction from the beginning of the 1900s to now. And what is that?
That's Mechanics Hall fire.
Oh, I missed the fire. Oh, I remember.
That's okay. It burned down in 1949, and thank goodness we had our own fire company at that point. It was not able to save the Mechanics Hall, but it was such a bad fire that fire engines had to come from Cranberry, Rocky Hill, I believe from North Brunswick, New Brunswick, just so that the other houses in the area would be protected, and of course our own fire department.
Yeah,
as well.
I remember that very well because my daughter was 2 years old then, and I was home. And Joe was working in New Brunswick, and I called Joe up. I said, Joe, come home quick, the hall's on fire. He says, well, get the dog and the kids out. And see, the hall was right across the street from us, but the way I gave him the message, I mean, he thought it was our house, but so. I guess that was some ride home for him. But anyway, all the engines came and they did work hard and they saved. And all the women in town as those engines came, they made sandwiches and they had food for all those firemen until they stayed there in the farm with them. And that's what it's been. South Monmouth Junction has been a very cohesive group of people. I mean, we didn't start like with farming. The railroad brought us together and we knew one another and worked together, and this is what you have today. We're the headquarters of South Brunswick, the municipal buildings here and the high school.
During World War II, there were 20 of our men and women who served from Monmouth Junction. That's a significant number from a very small town. Their names are listed on the South Brunswick honor roll. Now, this is very unfortunate but I don't believe that this honor roll exists anymore. I think that's a very, very sad thing, because the people who made the sacrifice to go to war, protect our country, fortunately, of the 20 people that went from Monmouth Junction during World War II, everybody came home. There was one family that was actually quite significant contribution on their own. This is the Scorato family. They had 8 sons that all served during World War II, and they all came home.
That's the way the families used to be in town that side. You know, that's why you had a lot of support from families.
After the war was the beginning of the Monmouth Junction Fire Company 4th of July parade. And this was a, well, I'm sorry, no, I guess it, when did it start?
46, I think it's 46,
so it was
1946, over 50 years.
And it was a tradition that continued up until just a couple of years ago. They would have the parade, the Firemen's Parade would come up Ridge Road and then through Monmouth Junction and down around past where the new post office is and end, I guess, where the new developments are. As Ruth said, Monmouth Junction was a very, very cohesive town. People from all walks of life really pulled together and did an awful lot to build this town. I think we should be very, very proud of what our predecessors in this town have done, and it also indicates what we need to continue to do. Yes, Ruth?
I forgot a story about the post office.
Okay.
Are you coming on with the post office? Do you have a picture of the old one before it moved off? Well, well, that's the store that Stryker Rowland built. But how about that when it turned to be a post office?
Yeah.
Well, see now.
I don't have that photo.
Oh, you don't?
No, I can't put my hands on it right this second.
Okay, all right. But next to that store, back where that tree is, there was a restaurant, and that was the first post office. But Monmouth Junction didn't warrant a train stop, but I'll tell you what, Monmouth did have, Monmouth Junction had a hooker. Well, not the kind of hooker you think.
No.
I mean, there was a pole there with a hook on, and I used and I remember, and Matt Lester would come out and put this bag on there, and I thought, oh my gosh, I thought somehow, I don't know how it worked, but the train would go by, they'd hook the mail bag, and it would go on the train track. That was in the early days. And then finally, you know, we grew a little more. Then Matt Lester had his old push wagon, and he pushed it over to his place. But of course, when you went to the post office, you could buy pork chops too, because it was a combination post office. Excuse me.
They used to fill the bags off. The train would buy it, hook the ones that were hanging, and they would just throw up the bags out the door.
Thank you. I mean, I missed the throw off. I didn't forget it. And then from that, it went back to Emmons' store. It was Emmons' store by that time, in the feed room. So they cleaned all the feed out, and the post office was in the feed room for a while. But then I know pretty soon down there, my husband started complaining, didn't he? There was an article. He said, it's about time this township got a new, is that it? Oh, yeah, new post office. Well, you know, we've lived here all our life, and you're always pushing for something to come or leave. So we finally got the new post office.
Well, I think that kind of wraps up
I guess so.
our story of Monmouth Junction.
I won't remember anything else.
We brought it up basically to the middle of the 20th century, which Monmouth Junction, as we said before, was really the prototype development of the late 19th century. And of course, into the 20th century, development has mushroomed and escalated. We kind of have a logarithmic growth. Our next presentation, as I'm sure Ellen will explain, is going to be on Kendall Park. So I want to thank you all for listening to us. This was not an exhaustive survey of Monmouth Junction, and I certainly hope it wasn't exhausting. But thank you very much for coming.
I forgot one thing. I forgot the sad arms that were late coming.
Oh.
But these are the arms that, you know, you would put them on the hot stove, and you put this in here. Oh, they're awful heavy. Oh my gosh, you pick them up, and the other one would be getting hot, and then you take this off, and you put it on that one, and that was hot. That's a way of life, but we've made progress. Oh, I did forget another thing. I talked so much.
I just want to show you some baby pictures. If you see that little one up there in the upper left corner, that's Ruth when she was a baby. And moving over, she's growing. And down here we see her with her dollies and her doll pram. This picture I love not only because of how we catch Ruth in it, but if you see in the back, you see Dennis's house on the right and Mechanics Hall behind the windmill. And I don't think we talked about the one. That would be your barn. I thought Mechanics Hall was in one of these pictures. Oh, it is coming up. But I don't think we talked about that windmill being on the property, Dennis. And then finally, we have Ruth as a young woman in 1938. And I just want to tell you that this lady will be 87 years old in June, and she is a treasure to us. But there's more. In February, our son-in-law was 40 years old, and we couldn't celebrate with him because he lives in upstate New York. So I tape recorded some people's observations on being 40. And Ruth was one of the people that I asked to make a comment. And after she said 40, when was 40? She said to my son-in-law, wrinkles of the body don't mean anything. She said, it's wrinkles of the brain that you have to watch out for. She said, and I try to avoid wrinkles of the brain by always having a purpose in life. And from what I know of Ruth Spataro, her purpose in life is to do whatever it takes to make South Brunswick a better place. I have always found that to be. And I just want to thank her from the bottom of my heart. And I want to thank Dennis Farrelly, not only for his presentation, but for the jumping jack act he had to do with the two pieces of equipment. I think he handled it extremely well. So thank you very, very much, Ruth and Dennis. And Tony Santawasa, too, who certainly represents a wealth of railroad experience in Monmouth Junction. As we get ready to close, I will remind you that our last presentation will be held on June 3rd, and we will be focusing on the last area of South Brunswick that came into the developmental stages, and that is Kendall Park. And it is historic because it introduced a whole new lifestyle that emerged after the Second World War. So we'll have another fine program for you. And before I close, I'm going to ask you to do something. I did it myself the other day. Ruth began the program by telling you that her grandfather lived in a house on the site of this library, and that Longbridge Farm extended from Kingston Lane, which is right outside the door, over to Stouts Lane, along the Piscopec, which is now Lawrence Brook. When you go home today, whether you live on the east side of town or the west side of town, go out to Kingston Lane, make a right turn, go down Ridge Road, and get off Ridge Road and follow it through Monmouth Junction. And as you're going through Ridge Road around the bend, notice the red barn. And if you can, glance quickly to the left, and you'll see something that looks a little wet there. I learned the other night that there's a spring back there. And earlier on, there was a pump that people came from far and wide to gather fresh spring water. Now, don't linger too long and find yourself not being able to make the bend by Dennis's house. And if you get a chance again, when you make that serpentine curve, look to your left down Walnut Street, because that's where the railroad station would have been observed. And I don't think anybody mentioned today that to get to the railroad station, you literally had to jump the tracks. There was no roadway or bridge or walkway to get you there. You had to, as Ruth said, carefully cross to get to the railroad stations, which is unfathomable today. Going down Ridge Road a little further, as you go past the post office, and you look at those houses that are known as Hungry Hill, and then as all the houses Dennis showed us today, out to Stouts Lane where Arnold Farmer's house sat?
Arnold Farmer's house, yeah.
Arnold Farmer Stout's house sat where the new high school sits today, and then on out to Route 1. I don't think you'll ever make that drive again and take it for granted the way you may have when you came into this room today. It's a wonderful history, it's a wonderful area, as is all of South Brunswick. And I thank you for coming. I hope to see you on June 3rd. Bye now. Did everybody get the, didn't I put them out? You know what? Phil Needham has a copy, so you asked him to get a copy for you.